This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's meeting, Chris Ryer. Chris is the director with the City of Baltimore Department of Planning, and his presentation is titled Transportation in Baltimore's Comprehensive Plan, a 10-year look ahead. We have a unique opportunity today to speak with Chris and his colleagues about where we want to be in 10 years with respect to transportation planning. So without further ado, welcome, Chris.
Hi, thank you, Robin. I want to introduce Kyle Leggs. Kyle Leggs is the supervisor in the Community Planning Division. He's assigned to the southwestern section of the city. He's kind of an old fart like me. He was, as you know, the red line went right through his area. He does have a background in transportation, although, as hopefully you all know, we don't have anymore a transportation planning division because our Department of Transportation has a planning division, which we think is a really good thing. Also, we have Sarah Parnillum. She is the division chief of our policy and data analysis division, and is heading up our comp planning process. They're both here today. I am not here to lecture anybody. I got a little PowerPoint to kind of give you the background of this thing. It's really to start soliciting ideas, and I'll come back to that once I do the little PowerPoint. So let me try to share my screen. I'm not, we don't use Zoom in the city. You may remember when the pandemic started, we had incidences of Zoom bombing in public hearings, and the city yanked its contract with Zoom. And why am I not able to find my presentation? Well, I can't find it.
Chris, do you want me to share?
Could you, Sarah? Yeah.
Yep, I'll just take me a
I need
moment.
the background page up. So background page, what it says is that comp plan is something we are now, actually this is new since the last comp plan. We're on a 10-year cycle. It is triggered by the census. And we have a set period of time. We have to finish this. Could we go to the next page? A set period of time to finish. We have to finish this by 2024. There are certain loosely defined requirements by the state. I'll go through those in a sec. But this is the foundation document for the city's planning purposes for a decade. So it is an opportunity to look ahead 10 years. And that's not something to take lightly. It can be, as you know from our, let me just explain the past. In the past, the last time we completed a comprehensive plan was, I believe, 2007. And that was the first time in probably 30 years. That became the template for the Dixon administration in many ways. It also so backed up the eventual update to the zoning code, Transform Baltimore, which was hopefully deliberately transformative. We drastically changed the zoning code and the future land use regulations of the city with Transform Baltimore. That was completed in 2017. In this interim, since we did the last comp plan, the state changed their requirements to coincide with the census process. And so we would assume that's going to remain for the next generation, we hope. So we would be back here in 10 years and hopefully every 10 years. The other good thing about this is Baltimore County is doing the same thing. In Arundel County, we're all doing the same thing at the same time. So it opens up an opportunity for the local jurisdictions to collaborate. The charter, the city charter, requires the planning commission to adopt this. So that's our goal here. The state requirements I just referred to, Sarah, if you could go to the next page. These are examples of about a dozen of them. Many of them kind of overlap. You see transportation's one of them. So is infrastructure. What's the difference? So this gives us some very general guidelines. It can give us a way to organize it. We're not using this as a way to organize it. We don't have to. We're doing something very similar to what Baltimore County is doing, and that we're using some American Planning Association sustainability guidelines sort of to organize. I think it's not strictly based on that either, but that's our general approach. But this is showing like we can't leave any of this stuff out. I think it's common sense. I just wanted to show you sort of the legal boundaries of this process. Now, so how are we going to do this? So we have the time frame. We've got to finish by 2024. How are we going to organize the city planning department's role in all this? We are making a big push into equity and what that means is this is not applied to this group really, because this is a group that has probably participated in these processes in the past, but we're really making a big effort to reach people that haven't participated in the past or might not participate unless we make an extra effort. And that's part of our equitable approach to this comp plan. So we have, I couldn't name the list, but we have contracted with a number, half a dozen or so, really grassroots organizations in the city to try to push out further than we have in the past. We're also, I think this is where I bring this up. Yeah, you all probably, I know some of you participated in the mayor's transition plan. The transition plan turned into an action plan. The action plan is the sort of measurable outcomes for the mayor's first term. Our last comp plan, we started under Mayor O'Malley and finished under Mayor Dixon, and it was in a very different context, both in every way, politically and time-wise, and it became a sort of strategic plan for the new administration. It was less focused on physical planning and more on strategy by the city. Now, in some ways, the mayor's action plan is doing that. But it's doing it in a 4-year look ahead, not a 10-year look ahead. So we kind of held back while that process went forward and came together. It's now together, it's all on the website. And so we're going to build on that, but extend it and look further out. It will also, I believe, sort of force us to focus a little bit more on the physicality of the comprehensive plan. And you may or may not know this part, but within the mayor's action plan, I would say our major role is how to retain residents. We'll come back and talk about the population loss that appeared between 2015 and 2020. And in fact, to get the city on a growth pattern, as most cities are in 2022. The planning department within the action plan is uniquely charged working with Live Baltimore to try to increase the retention rate of Baltimore citizens and to attract new residents. I'll touch on that for a second. We can talk about it later, but really what we're seeing where we're losing population is we'll call them Black middle neighborhoods. That's the term we're using. It is this sort of blend of blue collar, white collar, overwhelmingly African-American neighborhoods in certain parts of the city where we are losing population and not replacing it. And in terms of growth, I would say if you look at the numbers, our growth has slowed down also in the last 5 years, and that's been a pretty straight line between the Trump administration and its work with immigrants and what's happening in Baltimore. We had a pretty strong growth rate in immigration prior to 2016. And that has fallen off. So again, how do we make it an inviting place to live? So residents want to stay, and especially sort of Black households, if you look at the big picture. So look at the big picture, and all across the country, a couple of things are happening. One is rich are getting richer, poor are getting poorer, the middle class is shrinking. That's happening in Baltimore. And Black household wealth is literally 1/10 of white household wealth. And the big place to build wealth, or the thing that we can control at least, is in your home values. So we want to maintain and support those home values, particularly for Black residents, so that they're building wealth as part of their tenancy in Baltimore. Can we go to the next page, Sarah? So as I said earlier, we're building on a couple of things here. The state requires those elements to be considered. We build on the 2020 census results, and I just sort of make a note that those 2020 census results are incredibly flawed. You all know the process and how it was extended by the Trump administration. There were fights and over residency requirements that delayed a lot of activity. And then at the last minute, the administration pulled the plug on the census about 6-8 weeks early. I thought we had a good strategy. The planning department led that strategy. We had identified the hard to reach populations, half a dozen hard to reach populations, families with children under 5, elderly Black residents, immigrants, returning citizens, and we had a whole strategy around reaching those groups, and we followed that strategy. We funded it and we followed it, but still it was a truncated process, and it was pretty minimal. It was first digital census. So it was problematic. It was very problematic. And then the mayor's action plan and the pillars, and then the community engagement. That's our equity strategy there. So I'd be happy to come back and talk more about that. Actually, Sarah knows more than I do, so we can talk more about that if there are questions at the end. So here's our process. We have an advisory council. Again, we've tried to reach out to folks that weren't normally engaged in this. And we have sort of this multi-pronged strategy to do that. We're kind of in this listening mode today. This is part of that. Then we'll develop recommendations, then we'll come back and listen and talk again about the recommendations. Again, we got to get it all done by 2024, but actually that's plenty of time. Next page, Sarah. These are some engagement opportunities. I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can look at it. This is the beginning, not the end. I would imagine that you all will participate more, and again in this. So I'm not going to dwell on it, but we do have a pretty robust strategy, I think, in essence, over the next 12 months to engage the residents in this. And next, these are open houses we have scheduled for this spring. And then the today's topic, as Robin said, is really wanted this group's input. I was thinking on the way here today, it's like it's not like we want your ideas at this stage. We're not really at an idea stage. We're sort of at an analysis stage. And we're at a very high level. So then, we're trying to get our hands around what a 10-year look ahead includes. So we're not really talking about projects. I think so. For purpose of starting this discussion today, what do you think are the most important issues for the next 10 years? Where I sit now as planning director, I think there are two, and they're not transportation issues, they're transportation funding issues. The city, planning does the capital budget for the city. So and hopefully this group knows this. If you don't, I'm really worried. But back in the Great Recession, O'Malley was our governor at that time. The city lost $100 million a year in highway user revenue. And that was supposed to be temporary. But Governor Hogan, not only did he cancel the red line, but he did not restore the highway user formula. So we lost the red line and we lost $100 million a year for over a decade. So when you look out your window at the transportation infrastructure of the city, and you say, doesn't look too good, it looks kind of patched a lot. I don't see a lot of street resurfacings. I see a lot of potholes and patch potholes. That is what you are saying. You are seeing a city whose transportation capital budget has been decimated for over a decade. We have lost over $1 billion worth of transportation investment in this city on top of the red line. So just imagine the scenario, the red line's canceled, the state had, I'm not even gonna name the number, how much the state was invested, how much the federal government was invested. The city twisted itself into knots to provide its share of the red line. And all that went away. Many of you, I hope this group realizes, many of you at the same time that the red line was canceled, the MTA had this fantastic plan for MARC, right? To take MARC up to a full system. MARC's been at capacity for years. We need 4 bridges across the Susquehanna, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to grow MARC. And that plan, Paul Weinerfeld developed it back like early, I want to say 2005, something like that. That required a $1.5 billion investment. It was the biggest single, it was the peak of the bell curve between 2015 and 2020. And we had that money sitting in the red line. And did it go into MARC? No, not a dime of it went into MARC. It went into state highways. And by definition, state highway money is not spent in Baltimore City. We're the only jurisdiction that maintains state highways in the state of Maryland. So all that money, it was almost deliberately put in the one place where the city couldn't benefit from it. So restoring that formula, to me, it's like we can't do anything. Like when we implement our complete streets strategy, we do it with striping and flex posts. We don't do it with concrete, right? So that's the difference there. And unless you have the capital budget that you need to maintain a 300-year-old city, you're not really addressing the problem. So where I sit now, restoring that, and it's been a big turnover in the city's representation in Annapolis, and we've lost a lot of power in Annapolis. So that's a major issue. We made some progress this year. We got a percentage of it back. So I think we've gone, so the numbers are, we used to be at $250 million a year for our transportation budget. We lost $100 million a year. We are on track to get back up to maybe $170 million a year. But just remember, you take about 120 of that is funding the operations of the Department of Transportation. So that all the day-to-day stuff that keeps the traffic moving and puts in the flex posts and does those kinds of things, that's the operating budget of transportation. There is very little capital. In fact, it's so bad. The one thing we're mandated to do in terms of the capital budget is provide a 20% match to federal highway dollars. So we have to do that or we lose the federal highway dollars. And in the city, in a scarcity environment, those dollars are prioritized towards bridges, right? Because we don't want bridges to fall down and hurt people. And bridges are very expensive. So you look at Edmondson Avenue, you look at that project, that was a 10-year project. And part of the project is saving your nickels, right? Saving your federal allocation, desperately looking for a match for that federal delegation and hoarding it for 5 years till you can get the project going. So that HUR formula to me is a fundamental transportation issue for the city for the next 10 years. It doesn't matter what we say today. If we don't have the money to implement it, there's not going to be a change 10 years from now. We'll be sitting around talking to each other, saying the same thing we're saying today. The other issue, I would say primary transportation issue, and I think you guys would probably agree with this. You go around to our competitors, to DC, to Philly, to Boston, New York, and they have at least some portion of a rail-based transit system. So I would argue that structurally, the MTA, and I think Patrick's on here, we need a regional transit authority that can be its own boss, and a regional transit authority that has its own income stream, so that it can plan for the next 10 years, and not do what everybody else is doing, is sort of lurch from project to project as you get the funding to do it, and you end up basically your transportation strategy is a strategy to stretch your dollars as far as you can and make the biggest impact that you can with a very limited pot of money. So I'll shut up at this point. Robin, you can moderate if you want. We'll take notes. I think Kyle's taking notes. Again, with the caveat, I'm really looking at this point less for ideas than for analysis. Like, what do you think the problem is? What do you think, looking at a 10-year window, what do you think the city should focus on and work on over the next 10 years? We don't have to talk about solutions today. We'll talk about what are the most important things, not pie in the sky, but realizing if you can't fund these things, they're not going to happen. So I'll stop. And I don't know, Robin, if you want to call on people, or I see hands up. Jim's hands up, Klaus.
I'll tell you, I'll take it over from here. Happy to do that. But first, just want to thank you so much, Chris, and also your colleagues. This is a wonderful opportunity to have this dialogue and exchange. And, we look forward to inviting you back again, as time progresses. So what I would like to do is open the floor to people that would like to share their thoughts in terms of, what they would like to, sort of the areas of focus within the next 10 years. And I'd like to start with Klaus.
Good start.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for pointing out very drastically, how we have suffered from the funding side. And I know the planning department puts the capital budget together. And so you have firsthand knowledge every year of that situation. And you also know that Transit Choices is organized together with a larger transportation coalition that has fostered and supported the Reinvestment Act for MTA funding, and some of the success has come through in more funding for MTA and also for the Highway User Trust, Highway User Fund. Transit Choices always likes to stress land use and transportation, and that's why I think you are invited today, because the land use side is just as important as the investment in the transportation infrastructure. And we know that in Baltimore, where our transit assets are, namely the rail assets, and where the stations are, there's usually a hole in the donut, and the opposite of transit-oriented development. So that is one of the analysis problems, and we make sort of little steps towards having some sort of transit-oriented development. It's in the zoning and so forth, but it's not really happening in a really concentrated and focused way. And so I know you have these 6 impact investment zones identified in the city where you want to concentrate the investment, and some of those fall, like Park Heights, into areas where there is also TOD possible. So that's one thing. And as a vestige of the red line, where there were these 15 SACs, these station area advisory committees of community grassroots groups that worked for 2 years in a really exemplary way to identify the vision around the then proposed red line stations. And those community plans, basically, for land use, they should be enacted no matter whether there is a red line or not, because we know that the east-west corridor is still a priority corridor in the regional transit plan, as well as with the current $55 million investment in improving that east-west corridor, and the land use portion is not really covered by those 55 million. So the idea here is to take these SAC plans and really put them in the master plan and make them a concentrated strategy, particularly in the butterfly areas, in the disinvested areas. And lastly, you mentioned, Mark, it is really important that when rebuilding the middle neighborhoods, that we think of Baltimore as a part of the region. And with the MARC plan and the potential that's now studied in the legislature in the state to run the MARC trains all the way down to the L'Enfant station in Washington, we would have 45-minute access from Baltimore to the new Amazon headquarters in Arlington County and in National Landing. And so this is an aspect that we often forget in Baltimore, that we are not just an island unto ourselves. And so to support this MARC expansion, that it would go beyond Union Station is very key to Baltimore. So with that, I will shut up.
Chris, you're on mute.
You remember all the work we did with the MTA on the West Baltimore MARC station, and in that period of time, what was driving that process was the red line. But the reality was, without the red line, it's hard to do a big project around West Baltimore MARC without MARC capacity, right? So we do have an opportunity, I think, in this 10-year window, with the tunnel and the relocation of the station, assuming that generates capacity on MARC. Yes, we have an opportunity to create a new Washington suburb on Route 40 in West Baltimore. And that's probably, along with maybe some funding to take down the highway, or at least to modify the highway to nowhere. That's probably going to rise to the top of this comp plan, I would think. I think those stars are going to align on that, and we should look at realistically what we should try to accomplish in that window around those two projects. I think that's a very good point. And I will say maybe it's not adequate yet. I know Kyle's involved, but we're certainly working with the MTA on their crosstown project. I've heard a couple of people say we should try to reactivate these station area planning groups, which I was a member. And that's a good point. We'll take a look at that.
Thank you. Our next question, Jim Linus.
Chris, I've known you many years, and I've always admired your ability to build destinations in the city. And I think what you've done in East Baltimore and in Southeast Baltimore is a good example of destinations that could be developed elsewhere throughout the city. Now, when I say destinations, I'm not talking about residential because the residential's there. I'm talking about transition from residential to other uses, and primarily commercial uses that would, and I'm not talking industrial either, that would essentially invite suburbanites to go to the city to do their business, as well as parts of Baltimore City. I think that's an important thing. I live out, if you know, in Oak Crest Village, which is a big retirement community in Parkville. And one thing I really never recognized before I moved here is how little connection this area has to the city.
Yeah.
It really, essentially, when I go to Baltimore, I either go over toward the Charles Street JFX corridor, or I go down to the Canton corridor, but I really avoid driving in Walther Boulevard, which I live on. It's not connected, by the way, to the Walther Boulevard in the city. And I never think of going in Pulaski Highway, or essentially it's a no-go zone if you live in the suburbs. And that's, from a marketing perspective, finding reuses of underutilized residential land really has a high priority for destinations. And I think also relative to the transit issue throughout the city, look at the connections. I guess we got to start with buses and cars because that's what we have and we know we're going to have it. So look at opportunities for better bus routing and more frequent bus routing so that people that take the bus will have reasons to get on and off at various locations. Right. And same thing with cars. If you drive in Bel Air Road, it's got some pretty interesting retail along Bel Air Road and Harford Road, but finding a place to put your car to do that business is a real disincentive to going to those places. So I just mentioned these. I think most of you that know me know that I've been pretty vocal about the rail, providing more rail corridors. I will say this, you may know that I was opposed to the Howard Street Tunnel for industry and was pro Howard Street for public transportation. I don't think the fact that that the investments are being made for the industrial uses is a lost cause for the public transportation, because in time, it's going to be very clear that the Howard Street Tunnel is still a choke point and still doesn't provide enough robust transportation for the industrial uses in the eastern side of the harbor and northern side of the harbor. So that opportunity exists to reuse those corridors for rail transit or other forms of transit. Just in general, I'll speak in very general terms at this point. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I'm
No,
really, thank you for being here today. This is super.
yeah, no, thank you. And you're bringing up a really good fundamental point here. I mean, we're all sort of well aware of the rail constituency, the development community is very invested in that, but I think maybe a fundamental issue for this comp plan is sort of looking at our investment in bus infrastructure. Again, wearing the hat of a 10-year window, like how much do we want to focus on that? Because, you know, we can't provide transit priority unless we overhaul our signal system. It's a big cost. Is that a priority? Should that be a priority for the city? Because we can make a quicker impact on the transit dependent population. That's a good discussion to have for the comp plan. That's a discussion that we want to talk to the MTA about, because we want to be on the same page. You know, our transportation department, I will give them credit. They have shifted their emphasis with what resources they do. It's basically, you know, priority number one is the MTA. Whatever they want, we try to do with our limited resources. And maybe, you know, we don't have a regional transit funding mechanism, and maybe we bifurcate. Maybe we have one group of people working on that and another group of people working on improving the existing bus system. I think those are good kind of fundamental issues for a 10-year look ahead.
Thank you, Jim. Jamie?
Hi, thanks for being here. I think this is fun. I came in with kind of like what I think you would call a pie in the sky idea proposal, but I guess I'm not going to do that because you're looking for more analysis. I think that one of the big opportunities for the city is kind of further establishing that like twin cities situation between Baltimore and DC. I think that currently does not exist. I think in many ways, DC feels a lot farther away than it should be. And we can talk about how there is an existing MARC line that takes like 50 minutes to an hour to get from one to the other. But I think that that's not really enough to like move the needle. Currently, I don't think most people would choose willingly to make that commute if you include like the walking on either end. A further issue is that once you get or one on our side, if you're commuting from Baltimore to DC, there's not that much housing near the stations that would service that commute. And then in the other direction, if you were, say, a company that wanted to like locate in Baltimore because of lower prices and promise DC as like a living option, the actual stations don't really connect well to downtown. And I think that's like a key problem that separates that potential reality of Baltimore and DC being twin cities, which I think is critical for the economy. So I think that one, decreasing the commute time to get from one city to the other in the form of like an express train that goes from one to the other. The MARC's top speed is like 125 miles an hour or something. So you could easily have that commute be less than a half hour. And also just having the locations be better. And I guess this is getting into the pie in the sky, but I think that a long-term solution is to actually have a MARC station right downtown at Charles Center. And that would actually be what moves the needle to cause people to think of downtown Baltimore as a living option when working in DC, or as a company considering Baltimore as a place to actually have employees while promising DC as a living option. So I think that having that like intercity flow is really important. So I guess that's one thing that I'll say. Another thing is I think in addition to like transitioning towards rail transit, which I think is like what most people here would agree is like the ideal path forward. I think that in the same token, we should be transitioning away from like the high throughput traffic roads, and this is actually pretty cheap to do. But currently, like downtown just straight up like is not walkable in any way, and it's hard to get to because there's like no parallel parking anywhere. So basically, like there's no reason for anybody to ever like go downtown, because it's just not a pleasant place. There's all these parking garages. Pratt Street and Lombard are like should be an active goal for those to be like the two most walkable streets in the entire city, but instead they're just these like wastelands, like basically connecting two highways. But I don't think that reality really has to exist at all. So I think that transitioning those streets plus Light Street to being just like straight, just like Alisana, basically like just a two-way street with one lane of traffic on each side and then a parallel parking lane. So that people can actually park when they go there, pay a meter. And also it doesn't feel like if you're a pedestrian, it doesn't feel like you're like walking through a highway. So I think that like little things like that, which are pretty cheap, would I think go a long way towards making downtown like a more desirable place to be.
Great, thanks. Those are good points. We do, and we work with Downtown Partnership a lot. That's a good goal. I haven't heard the term Twin Cities used with Baltimore and Washington before. My generation, I think there are a couple people that have spoken that are my generation, probably wouldn't embrace that. I think it's interesting that you bring it up, because older generation thinks of Baltimore as the big city and Washington as the little brother. And we're wrong. It's not like that anymore. And I have relations with my counterpart in DC, but we are not planning together. And in fact, the structure of the regional planning structure is still limited to the Baltimore region. It does not. We don't do a lot of joint planning with either DC itself or the region. It's a good point.
Thank you, Jamie. Caroline?
Thank you, Robin and Chris. It's great to hear you present. Appreciate your overview of what feels like a very dire situation. So I'm glad that you're the one that has a hand on the wheel. But I was just trying to think about, in the broader context of, money is a problem. Obviously, the city is completely underfunded. We're in such a stranglehold. It's hard to think abundantly when there's no resource or will. Sometimes feels like no political will to actually follow through. And that's my greatest frustration. If I was going to name the two top things, I would say one is money, because you can't build infrastructure with like the bake sale. Yeah, right. And then the second thing is a consistently held vision to execute a plan that no politician can put under. So you look at like Greenville or Charlotte or Denver or these cities that have done great public infrastructure. I look at Charlotte and how they embraced TOD 10 or 15 years ago, and now what's come of it is it's just amazing to see. And so I'm wondering what will it take for Baltimore to have an inclusive enough community, corporate, and government process that we can come to a vision that we hold so firmly as so critical to our success, that no politician can reimagine or redirect or cancel it. Like that it's bigger than any one administration or any one campaign. And in fact, if someone campaigned against it, they'd be offending the entire voter base or such a broad majority platform that they wouldn't dare. So I don't know what that is, but I feel like Baltimore is a place of unexecuted plans in transit. Some have been very good, connecting 83 and 95. Great, that didn't happen. The highway to nowhere, probably great, that didn't happen because now we can knit the communities together. But the red line, horrible waste of time, money, effort. We've talked about the Charles Street trolley, never happened. We had Hopkins to the harbor, never happened. We have this plan, pretty simple plan to connect a bike route that goes all around the city. Hasn't happened in 10 years. Like, we can't have a bike route that goes around the city. And we're talking about dealing with, a big infrastructure plan. So my big thing is, how do we create the platform, the vision that is so compelling, so simple to understand, that no one dare put it asunder.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. And let me add to them. Jamie just talked about Twin Cities. From where I sit now, mostly what I hear about that idea is not opportunity, it's fear. That seems to be the predominant emotion around the connection to Washington. It's people are afraid that it's going to increase housing prices, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that speaks to your sort of longer term vision issue. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you, Caroline. Jimmy,
Yeah.
would you like to ask?
You want me to
question?
go?
Yes, please.
So Chris, it's good to meet you and thank you for being here. First of all, it's a great discussion. I'm a layman, really. I'm not an expert in transportation or funding, but right now I'm hearing that there's a lot of federal money available for transportation in the city.
Yeah.
And so my question is to you, how do we access that money unless we have specific projects that we can apply for? And what's your answer for the best way to go about right now bringing money to the city for transportation from the Infrastructure Act and even COVID-19 Relief Act?
Okay. So I'll be blunt. Cheap issue. Cheap. It's bullshit. Let me say that. So first of all, the really impactful Infrastructure Act has not passed, and it does not look it will pass. So we're talking about a very limited resource in that sense. We do have the first act, which translated to the famous $647 million to the city. Almost none of that goes towards infrastructure, I want to point out. In fact, we're quite on top of this, but the way we're on top of it is we got to come up with the local match for what federal infrastructure money we do get. So we have programmed that in this upcoming budget. We will be able to provide our match to maximize the amount of federal money, but it is not as significant as you would think from reading in the press. Let's use Highway to Nowhere as an example. The existing Infrastructure Act, maybe if it sent all the money to Baltimore, we could really do something with the Highway to Nowhere. But we're on top of this. It'll probably happen in May. There'll be a grant opportunity with federal highways. We have, lots of you have probably participated. We have lots of planning schemes for the Highway to Nowhere. They've been done over the last 10 or 15 years. That's planning from our perspective and planning from a community perspective. We've never done planning from an engineering perspective on the Highway to Nowhere. So we really don't have the information to what exactly are we going to do with this mile-long trench through West Baltimore. So I think, well, I fervently hope that a year from now, we'll come back, we're working closely with DOT, we will have the money and we will be talking to you guys and the engineering firms in town, and we will start to develop some scenarios. So if there was a real Infrastructure Act, we would know what we wanted to do and how much it would cost. And in fact, hopefully we would have 2 or 3, we would have maybe have a high cost, low cost, medium cost option. It's not rocket science. We all want to get that thing to a point where we can develop it, right? But how do we do that? There are a lot of utility issues, stormwater issues, just the sheer size of the thing before we can really answer that question. So I want to maintain the perspective. There's not a ton of cheap money floating around in infrastructure. Just as President Obama said when he was president, he realized there's no such thing as a shovel-ready project. It doesn't exist, because when you work in a scarcity model, you don't spend a lot of money on design and engineering unless you know you're going to build it, right? So design and engineering, you guys know this stuff, that is a multi-year process when you're talking about infrastructure. So there's no quick win here. A good example, here's a great example. Even if we restore HUR funding, if you haven't looked at the website, we've done a great thing around a road diet around Druid Hill Park, right? We're taking out the sort of so-called Northwest Expressway, reconnecting the neighborhoods to Druid Hill Park. It's a great project. There's a great consulting team on there. They've done the slider thing that sort of shows the evolution of the Northwest Freeway. But that project's a $50 million project if it's a nickel. And that is probably more than the entire capital budget of the Department of Transportation right now for a year. And really, if you had $50 million, you'd be spreading it among 20 different projects, all of which trying to leverage that money to turn it into something bigger. So it's really important to understand the process of building something and sort of backing into it, so that the idea becomes reality and doesn't stay an idea. That's what, I think where we would screw up the comp plan is if we have a ton of ideas without the strategy to get there. That's why I opened this with let's look at the funding source for existing infrastructure, and let's look at the funding source for future transit. And if we don't resolve those problems, then we can't implement our ideas. So I'll use the highway to nowhere to use your example to show how we hope to back into that problem, but the federal money is not there. I don't want to mislead people. It's not there to do it. It may be there to chip away at it, and I fervently hope that. But I don't think it's there to resolve it, and I don't. There's a political will thing here. We need the political will to take on these big infrastructure projects, and we need people to understand, well, that, you can't have a moratorium on gas tax every time the price goes up if you want a regional transit system. I just came back from 2 weeks in London. The place compared to where we are, compared to where London is, that is generations of investment that got London to where it is. 250 tube stations, this fantastic regional rail system all around the city. We got a long way to go before we're there. And part of it is sort of grounding our discussion in achievable things and educating the public as to what things cost and sort of a process for getting there. So that's why I think that's a good role for a comp plan, if the citizens can get a vision. So first of all, if the citizens embrace the idea of a twin city, let's use Jamie's example. Step number one is that a goal? and so people will have to realize, well, that's a benefit for me, not a liability. And then step by step, what does that look like? And then what does that cost, and how do we make it happen? I think maybe the comp plan can do that. I'd like to try that with your help. But I'm leery of the politics of statements like there's a lot of federal money floating around, because there's not. It's going to go fast, and it's going to go towards things that have been underfunded for 20 years. The backlog is tremendous, and just using President Obama say there's no such thing as a shovel ready. What there is a backlog. And the backlog is not forward looking at all. It's backward looking. It's looking at stuff that is falling apart or was messed up to start with. It's not really forward looking. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Anna? Anna, you need to unmute.
Sorry. I guess I wanted to thank you for this presentation and for mentioning things like the Regional Transit Authority and the fact that Baltimore does not have a rail-based transit system like many of our other cities in the Northeast. And I'm just a regular person who does not like to drive and wants to try to walk or whatever. And I think I would love to see the less emphasis on cars in the city and more emphasis on people and getting people around by some way other than cars, by walking, by biking, by using transit. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
I do take a look at our complete street manual. We made that sort of quantum leap about 2 years ago. So we've developed the standard and the model. However, just to beat a dead horse here, we're implementing that with paint and flex posts, not concrete. So that's what you're looking at when you see a city without a real capital transportation budget. But yes, your point's very well taken. We're prioritizing people over automobiles now, and it's going to be gradual, but hopefully it will be more walkable. We will do something with Pratt and Lombard, and we'll get there. But right now, the way we're going to get there is with paint and flex posts, not with concrete.
Thank you, Anna.
So do take a look. It's online. The Complete Streets Manual is on DOT's webpage. It's a good read.
So, Chris, I would like to sort of pose, a final thought with respect to transit hubs. So we believe that the transit hubs, they're the key to an effective transit system. So what role does the planning department have in terms of looking at projects and integrating transit hubs?
Yeah, good.
I mean, I'm talking, you mentioned a moment ago about the MARC train station, but also Penn Station, and there are others. Very curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, strategy number one, to defer to my colleagues at MTA, is like we go to MTA and say, what do you want? Like, what can we do to help you do your job? And most of you on this call probably know this. I mean, I don't think it's a traditional sort of zoning issue. I think we've addressed that. We can tweak it, we can make it better, but we're not penalizing transit in a zoning sense. The envelope is there. The rail system, let's be realistic about the rail system. We are not Arlington County. The subway up in Northwest Baltimore we don't look like Arlington. We don't have TOD clusters around subway stations. And that's partially a function of the market where the subway is, and partially the function of it's a truncated system. It's a one-line system. It doesn't have the ridership that creates TOD opportunities. I do think, you know, coming out of discussions like this, that the comp plan might take a step back and say, yeah, let's focus on MARC-based opportunities for the next 10 years. Maybe it is Penn and Camden and West Baltimore that are our priorities over the next 10 years. We're being very supportive of the Penn Station planning process, on Central Baltimore planning process on North Avenue. I want to be brutally honest, like we couldn't pull off that North Avenue project without the MTA. Like, they provided the local match. Believe it or not, we didn't even have the local match on that project. I hope, you know, we did get some success with HUR funding in the General Assembly this year. I hope we can carry our weight a little bit better in the future. But they did that for us. It wasn't us helping them, it was them helping us. So, you know, I want to be at a part now where we can go to the MTA and do something other than get out of their way. We certainly, we can now support them with land use policy. Whether we can support them with transportation dollars, like that's, you know, that's what we're trying to do, I think, right now. Transit hubs are really interesting. You know, I think there's an opportunity maybe that we haven't looked at, and this could be a comp plan for reverse transit hubs. You know, we could look at the West Baltimore MARC station as a way to get to suburban job centers, for example. And that's not going to be a rail plan, it's going to be a bus-based plan. Jim mentioned he lives up in the northeast section of Baltimore County. We know, and MTA's told us, that that's a major job hub with poor transit access and struggling to get employees in that area. So that may be a reverse transit opportunity. I think that's a good comp plan type of issue. If we, as a community, want to elevate reverse transit hubs based strategies, that might be something that we want to look at.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time this morning, but Chris, we want to sincerely thank you. We could have probably continued this meeting for another hour. I mean, it's just been a great, great conversation. And for that, we are so appreciative of your time and your commitment, you know, within the planning process to do the right things and to listen to the public and to try to integrate, right, something that people will buy into that makes sense. And even more critically, to be realistic. And you make that point very clearly with respect to funding. I think it's so important to set expectations, and you've done an excellent job. So there are more questions in the chat than we had time today. So I will be sure, Chris, that you get a copy of all that, all those comments and thoughts. To each of you, you know, we say this every month, but we remain very grateful for your ongoing interest and support in improving Baltimore's public transit system. We're always happy that you choose to share, you know, part of your morning with us. So we remain grateful. We have an exciting meeting planned for next month, so be on the lookout for the details regarding that. If we have participants that are joining us today for the first time, it would be wonderful if you send me an email. That is robin@transitchoices.org, so that I may have your contact information, because we would love to include you in future meetings. We wish you all a wonderful day. And Chris, we look forward to inviting you back so that you can share the progress that the planning department is making on the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us. I want to note Kyle turned on his camera. Sarah is honchoing the comp plan process. So I really want to thank and acknowledge them for their help today.
Yes, we echo your sentiment. Thank you both. And we will talk soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, Chris.